Om Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarva dharma swarupine avatara varishtaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha. Namaste everybody. I usually start by saying good morning, but now the virtual audience is scattered all over the world. So somewhere it's evening, somewhere it's night. Today we shall meditate upon the holy life of Swami Shivananda ji. Swami Shivananda was one of the 16 direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, one of the 16 who started our monastic order. He was also the second president of the Ramakrishna order. So Swami Shivananda, he was born Taraknath Ghoshal in Bengal, in a place called Barashat. His father, Ramkanai Ghoshal, was a well-to-do man. His mother, both his father and mother were very religious, very pious. Ramkanai Ghoshal himself was a tantric practitioner, very accomplished tantric practitioner, as we shall see. And his mother, Taraknath's mother, Bama Sundari, was very devout. She prayed to Lord Shiva at Tarakeshwar, which is a very famous Shiva temple in Bengal, for a child. And she had this dream in which Shiva says to her that I'm pleased with you and a spiritual child will be born to you, a spiritual boy will be born to you. And when the boy was born, that's why they named him Taraknath, after Tarakeshwar, so Tarakeshwar Shiva. His father, Ramkanai, he was an accomplished tantric practitioner, and he had in fact established the Panchamundi asana. That's the seat, the asana on which a tantric practitioner, advanced tantric practitioners sit and meditate on Shakti, the Divine Mother. It's a sacred diagram on the corners of which are placed the skulls of 5 animals, and that's buried, and on that the practitioner seats. And it's supposed to be a very powerful place. Sri Ramakrishna himself did that kind of sadhana, and you can see that in Dakshineshwar, the place is enclosed. At one time, somebody else who wanted to see if he could experience the same things as Sri Ramakrishna actually went and sat down on the place, and he felt he was burning up. The same thing Ramkanai had done, and the house where they lived is now the Ramakrishna Mission Ashrama in Barasat. So if you go there, it's a busy little town, and the house is in the middle of the busiest part of the town. But if you go in there, it's a very serene and quiet ashrama. And in the shrine, in one corner, is that Panchamundi asana, that sacred seat. It's, of course, luckily enclosed. The child, an astrologer predicted about the child that he would either be a monk or a king. And indeed, he was very spiritual, very religiously inclined, introverted from his childhood. In fact, so much so, he was so Swami-like from his childhood. Instead of calling him Tarak, we can start by calling him Swami Shivananda. So we'll just use the name Shivananda. He was born on 16th November 1854. So 1854 means that he was quite a bit older than the other direct disciples like Vivekananda, Brahmananda and others by a few years. That's why they used to call him Tarak Da. Da means elder brother. So elder brother Tarak. 16th November, I know it's confusing. Actually, we should have celebrated the birthday last week. Last Sunday was the birthday of Swami Shivananda. But it's because of the lunar calendar and the solar calendar. So by this lunar calendar, the dates keep changing. They keep shifting. This year, all the dates are a little later than usual. Some Hindu festivals are, confusingly, some are with the solar calendar. So, for example, Makar Sankranti, which you're celebrating this week, is according to the solar calendar. So, it's always fixed on the same date, 14th January every year. So, it depends which calendar you're following. When later in life, Swami Shivananda would say how devout and simple his mother was and how spiritual his father was. His mother, for example, would feed all the children together. Her own son, Tarak, But also, there was a lot of boys there. His father used to support boys from poor families who would come to the city for education. So they would all sit together, and his mother would serve them food equally. In fact, the women of the neighborhood would say that, "Look, you have only one son. Why don't you take special care of him?" In those days, they had large families, but she had only one son. "Why don't you take special care of him?" And the simple lady would say, "Well, the Lord has given him, the Lord will take care of them. For me, they are all the same. All the children are the same." That is a sign of that simplicity and that detachment. That's a sign of the real spirituality. When he was a young boy, he came to know that his father had suffered a financial setback. His salary had been reduced. So in order to support the family, at quite a young age, he went off to work. He found a job in the railways, and he went to Mughal Sarai, which is a railway junction, a very big railway junction. He went there and he used to work for the railways. But always he was very spiritual. I mean, he had heard about samadhi, being completely absorbed in God, and somehow that pulled him greatly. And he wanted to achieve that. Of course, he was untrained, but he tried his best. He said, "I would sit at night and sit in meditation. Sometimes I would sit like Shiva, sometimes like the Buddha, and try to be, like merge in God and be one with God in samadhi." Of course, he didn't get very far, but he always felt that that's what he wanted to achieve in life. One of his friends told him that there is a man who has achieved samadhi, and in fact quite frequently does so. He's called Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, and he lives in Calcutta in the Kali temple of Dakshineshwar. So at that time already Sri Ramakrishna, as a mystic, he was quite known. In fact, in a village, when he would visit his village in Kamarpukur, in that area, the simple villagers would say, "A man has come who dies 6 times a day and comes back to life 6 times a day." And because when he goes into samadhi, his bodily functions would stop, his heartbeat would stop, his eyes would be like fixed, like a dead body's. So this is a man who dies 6 times a day. But he met Shivananda, Tarak met Sri Ramakrishna a little later. In between, he came back to Calcutta. In spite of his objections, because of the wish of his parents, he had to marry his wife, this young girl, Nitya Kali, whom he told about his spiritual desires, and he instructed her and guided her in spiritual life. He also became a member of the Brahmo Samaj, which was led by Keshab Sen at that time. And but just the lectures and the reading did not satisfy him. He wanted to experience God firsthand. He first saw Sri Ramakrishna in late 1880 probably at the house of Ramchandra Datta, one of the great householder devotees of Sri Ramakrishna. And he narrates how he went into the parlor, and Sri Ramakrishna was seated, the joyful figure, surrounded by devotees intently listening to him. And so this young man, Tarak, he went and sat down there, and lo and behold, Sri Ramakrishna was talking about samadhi. And so, of course, Tarak or Shivananda was very attracted to that, and he visited Sri Ramakrishna at Dakshineshwar to meet him privately. So the first time he actually met him privately, he entered the room, Sri Ramakrishna was sitting there. He bowed down to Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna spoke to him very affectionately. "Have you seen me earlier?" And he said, "Yes, and just recently I saw you at the house of Ramchandra Datta." He was overcome with this great devotion. He says, "I bowed down to him and I put my head in his lap. And Sri Ramakrishna stroked my head, and I felt he was my mother." And he says, from that time onwards, for the rest of his life, he felt Sri Ramakrishna is my mother. And I melted away in love and surrendered to Sri Ramakrishna forever. Sri Ramakrishna told him that come again. He took him to the Kali temple and he asked him, "Do you believe in God without form or with form?" And of course, like a good follower of the Brahmo Samaj, also his own spiritual inclinations. He said, "God without form, the impersonal, absolute." Sri Ramakrishna said, "Yes, that's good, but God with form is also real, And he made him bow down to the image of Kali, which he was hesitant to do, he says, because he followed the prescriptions of the Brahmo Samaj, which frowned upon image worship. But then he thought, Well, if God is everywhere, then God is in this image too. There shouldn't be a problem if I bow down. So he bowed down to the image of Kali. So next day, afternoon, that would be a Sunday, he came again to meet Sri Ramakrishna privately. And he says Sri Ramakrishna touched him on his chest. And he went into a deep meditation where he says, how easy it sounds. He says that I realized I am the Atman, ever free. I am consciousness, existence, bliss, Atman, ever free, ever pure. And Sri Ramakrishna is none other than the incarnation of God, is an avatara, born in this age for the welfare of humanity. And I have been born to serve him, and to help him in his mission. I thought that was really fast. Just a touch and everything he has realized. How nice that would be if we could all realize so fast. But one must understand how many lifetimes of spiritual practice and seeking and anchoring have gone before that a child could have this kind of a development, a ripeness at such a young age for spiritual realization. But he felt it. It was very clear that I am not this body and mind, I am the Atman. This is none other than the Lord come down to the world as an avatar. And my mission in life, I am here to spend the rest of my life serving him and working for his mission. He confided in Sri Ramakrishna about his desire for samadhi. And Sri Ramakrishna said it will happen in time. One day he wrote some mantra on the tongue of Shivananda, and in deep meditation Swami Shivananda actually attained samadhi. He asked Swami Shivananda, Tarak, that who is your father? He said he generally never did ask. He was not interested. Sri Ramakrishna would always be interested in the devotee, not so much about the family. But he wanted to know. He said, who is your father? Which is your family? Where have you come from? And he narrated, my father is Ramkanai Ghoshal. And then Sri Ramakrishna said, oh, Ramkanai Ghoshal of Barasat, of course I know them. That's why the Divine Mother wanted me to ask this question to you. I know them. I know him. I know him long ago. He was the attorney for the estate of Rani Rashmani, this temple garden estate. He was the attorney. He would come often to take care of the estate matters. And he is a great devotee of Mother Kali. He is a tantric practitioner. And he would come and he would bathe in the Ganga. He would put on a red bordered cloth and go to the temple of Kali. His face would radiate with an inner spirituality. His chest would always be red with emotion. And he would sit there for long hours and meditate with tears trickling down his cheeks. He always would be accompanied by a musician, a singer who would sit behind him and sing devotional songs. And then he would come out as if intoxicated with devotion to Kali. And people here, they really respected him very much. And Sri Ramakrishna said, at that time I used to suffer from an intolerable burning all over my body. So I thought I would ask him, your father. So all this has happened probably long before the birth of Tarak. I asked your father, you are a tantric practitioner and a devotee of the mother, so am I. But I have this burning all over my body. I don't know what to do. Can you tell me what it is? And he said, oh, I know what it is. You have to write down the name of your Ishta Devata and put it in an amulet and tie it around your arm. And so it's called an Ishta Kavacha. So you put that around your arm, you tie it to your arm, keep it close to your body, and it will be all right. And lo and behold, it worked. A strange remedy, but it worked. And he was rid of that intolerable burning all over his body. So that's why the Divine Mother wanted me to ask this question. You are the son of Ramkanai. He guided Shivananda in all his spiritual practices. Shivananda notes, he says that I was so fascinated by the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna. What beautiful words, what insights into spiritual life. So I thought I should write it down. And so I would listen carefully and go back home and write down notes of what he had said. So I was listening and Sri Ramakrishna was talking and suddenly he looked at me. Why are you looking so like that at me? Why are you listening so intently to me? And then I had to confess that I am writing notes of what you were teaching. And Sri Ramakrishna laughed and said, oh, that is not for you. Your life will be something else. So Shivananda said, at that moment I gave up all ideas of, collecting notes and all. I went back home, took those notes. I never took notes again. I took those, whatever I had written, and threw it into the Ganges. Notice how Sri Ramakrishna knew what role each person had. To M, the writer of the Gospel, Master Mahashaya, he deliberately encouraged him to listen carefully and note what he had said, even asking him, what did I say, repeat that, correcting him, because he knew that the Gospel would be written through M. But through Shivananda, no. He said, that's not your purpose in life. And he was very careful about the spiritual life of his direct disciples. So Shivananda, for example, was very attracted to Nitya Gopal, who was a great spiritual seeker. I mean, he had mystic trances during Sri Ramakrishna's life. But he mixed so freely with women, and Sri Ramakrishna did not want Shivananda to mix with him. And so he called Shivananda and said, look, it is true that he has genuine spiritual experiences and all, but his path is different. It's different from the path that I am teaching. So be careful. And Shivananda was very strict. He stopped going to Nitya Gopal. The other way around, a Vaishnava monk came who was very strict, a strict monk who was devoted to Krishna, but not to Radha. So he was devoted only to Krishna, and he excluded Radha from his devotion. And Shivananda was attracted to him, and then again Sri Ramakrishna told him, no, that is not the path. I accept not only God, the absolute, but I accept the Leela of the world also. Notice the connection. We may think that Krishna and Radha, all right, we understand that. But that has such a deep metaphysical implication. Do you accept only the ultimate reality and reject the world as an appearance? Or do you accept that as the reality? And that reality itself, literally, is here in this form also. This is Ayan Maharaj's Vijnana Vedanta idea here. So Sri Ramakrishna was very consistent there. He would make corrections to his disciples to bring them back to a specific path. Once Sri Ramakrishna, and all the other disciples also gathered together, they got to know each other. Later on, Naren came, Narendranath, who became Vivekananda, Rakhal, who became Brahmananda, and all the other young disciples. The oldest among them was Buddha Gopal, who later became Advaitananda, who was older than Sri Ramakrishna himself. One day Buddha Gopal said, he said that I want to distribute these ochre robes among the monks who come on pilgrimage to the Ganga Sagar, which is an annual pilgrimage to the place where the river Ganga flows into the Bay of Bengal. So that confluence is a holy place. And monks from all over the country, they come there. And it's customary to give gifts to them, and the gifts that they can use, ochre robes, or sometimes you give a Gita, or it's cold, so they give a blanket. So Buddha Gopal Maharaj, or Advaitananda ji, he wanted to give ochre robes to these monks. And Sri Ramakrishna said, where will you find better monks than these young boys? So give these robes to these young boys, the dhotis, the cloth to these young boys. And Sri Ramakrishna himself, with his own hands, he gave it. So that's the beginning of the Ramakrishna order. He himself gave the giving. If a monk gives the ochre robe to you in hand, so that symbolizes giving you sannyasa, that you become a monk. Of course, there is a formal process which happens later, but Tarak or Shivananda, he got the ochre robe from Sri Ramakrishna directly from his hands. Many, many years later, decades later, when Swami Shivananda was the head, the president of the whole order, at that time, Lady Minto, she was the wife of the Governor General of India at that time, the Viceroy of India, the British Viceroy of India at that time. And she visited Belur Math, and Swami Shivananda showed her around. So she was like the first lady. So she visited Belur Math, and Swami Shivananda was showing her around, and she said, so this is the monastery which Vivekananda started. And Swami Shivananda immediately corrected her. No, this whole thing was started by Sri Ramakrishna. So this is a point people miss because of the central role of Vivekananda. But remember, Vivekananda himself, like Shivananda, is part of the first group of monks who were taught and guided and inspired and guided into monastic life by none other than Sri Ramakrishna. At one point, Shivananda, Vivekananda, Abhedananda, they ran away from Dakshineshwar, from Kashipur actually at that time. They went to, from Dakshineshwar, they went to Bodh Gaya. They were inspired by the Buddha. And so they went there to meditate. And they meditated for long hours under the Bodhi tree there. And Vivekananda said that he saw a vision of the Buddha entering into Shivananda's body. And overcome with emotion, he embraced Shivananda. And then he used to call Shivananda Mahapurush, the great soul, because of this experience that he had. So we have these names. For Swami Shivananda is Mahapurush Maharaj. Everybody is Swami so-and-so, but in our order, if you just say Swamiji, it means Swami Vivekananda. Everybody is Maharaj, but if you just say Maharaj, it means Swami Brahmananda. And if you just say Mahapurush, Mahapurush means Swami Shivananda. So Shivanandaji in our order is known as Mahapurush Maharaj. After the passing of Sri Ramakrishna, so when they came back from Bodh Gaya, Narendranath, Vivekananda, Shivananda and Abhedananda, Sri Ramakrishna looked at them and he smiled and he said, with his fingers he indicated, you may go all around, you will not find anything. In this day and age, all the true spirituality, what there is here. The mother has shown me, it is here. After Sri Ramakrishna attained Mahasamadhi, the young disciples gathered together in the first monastery and they went to the village of Antpur in December 1886, where around the fire on Christmas Eve they decided to all become monks. And Swami Vivekananda, later they had a formal ceremony of monasticism, and Swami Vivekananda gave the name Shivananda to Tarak. So that's how he became Swami Shivananda. Before this, what had happened was, his wife Nitya Kali had fallen ill, and he helped her, nursed her, but she died. So after performing her final rites, he was really overcome with complete dispassion for the world. He resigned from his job. He went to his father and he said, I'm not coming back anymore. I'm going to become a monk. And his father, with tears trickling down his cheeks, he blessed Shivananda Tarak, and saying that I always wanted to become a monk, but I couldn't. Sri Ramakrishna had said something very interesting about his father to Shivananda. He said, your father is a great spiritual master, but a great spiritual seeker, but he has some worldly desires. So, because of his spiritual practices, he ended up amassing so much wealth. But he also did spend all of it in a noble way. So now, his father said, actually, I too wanted to become a monk, but I couldn't. And I bless you. May you attain God realization in your life. Go to our temple, the family shrine, and bow down to the deity, and go on your way. When he came and told Sri Ramakrishna that he had got his father's blessings, Sri Ramakrishna was very happy. So this was before Sri Ramakrishna passed away. And so the path was clear for him. When the brothers gathered together in the monastery, he could freely come and live there as a monk. By that time, he had already become Swami Shivananda. He didn't live there long. He was set out on traveling, pilgrimages. Swami Vividishananda, one of his disciples, who set up the Vedanta Society in Seattle. So he writes in the biography of Swami Shivananda that this young monk, Shivananda, he traveled in mountains, in the Himalayas, in the plains, in forests, and in deserts, just as a traditional wandering monk would. Very austere life. Swami Shivananda himself records how he had only one change of clothes. He carried no money. He avoided people. He didn't want to talk. He never introduced himself. He just begged for his food. He would often spend nights under a tree. And he said, this total dependence on God, it increases your fervor, and God becomes a reality to you. if you live completely depending entirely on God, as a monk in that way. So Swami Vivedishanji writes, this young man had experienced Samadhi 3 times. So we didn't know this fact, but he writes that he had experienced Samadhi 3 times under Sri Ramakrishna's teaching, when Sri Ramakrishna was there. And in this next 10 years, nearly 10 years, he wandered mostly incognito, in extreme hardship and a solitary wandering monk. He became established in Samadhi. So Vivedishanji writes that he became established in that. Both Swami Shivananda, Swami Brahmananda were asked, what are you doing? Why are you practicing so much spiritual austerity, so much meditation, so much japa, living such hard lives? You have already realized God. Sri Ramakrishna has already shown you in various ways, mystic vision, samadhi, all of that you have got. And both of them answered in the same way, that what he gave us, we are trying to make it our own. By his grace, we saw that. But we are trying to make it our own. Swami Shivananda said that Sri Ramakrishna had such tremendous power that he could awaken the kundalini, the spiritual power within a person, by a look or a touch. But that power that we wanted to gain for ourselves, so that we would be established in God realization continuously. And that's what he did in those 10 years. He describes how in Uttar Kashi, he had a little hut in the Himalayas, and all day long, he would go out once in a day to beg for his food. And all day long he would sit in japa and meditation. Later on, when Swami Vivekananda had come back and established Belur Math, he came to Swami Vivekananda. Very interesting stories are there. Swami Vivekananda had made a rule that everybody has to get up at 4 a.m. and go to the shrine and meditate. One day Swami Shivananda was late. He had overslept. And Swami Vivekananda said, Tarakda, we have made the rule. We have to get up at 4 a.m. Otherwise, you don't get to eat in the monastery. You have to go and beg for your food. And Swami Shivananda immediately said, yes, I'm ready to go. I'm leaving right now. So he left. And he went to house, begged for some food, brought it back, offered it to Sri Ramakrishna. And then he noticed others had already eaten, except Vivekananda, who was waiting for him. And he said, let me see what you have bought. And he said, I'll eat that food. I'll share this with you. And so the two brothers sat together and they ate. It is not for them that these rules were made. When he made these rules, Vivekananda, Swami Adbhutanandaji, who was a very radical, rebel-like monk, so Swami Vivekananda saw he was walking towards the gate of the monastery. What happened? Where are you going? He said, I can't follow all these rules you have made. I can't, you ring the bell and I'm going to meditate. You ring the bell, I have to get up. You ring the bell, I have to go to food. No, I can't do that. So I'm going to be on my own. And Vivekananda went and embraced him and said, this is not for you. It is for the boys who will come later to train them up. You live as you want to live. So they followed these rules to demonstrate it to us so that the later generations would learn and have a good example to follow. The Maharaja of Banaras had given some money to Swami Vivekananda to establish an ashram in Banaras itself, in the holy city of Varanasi. So Vivekananda actually asked Shivananda to go there and start that ashram, which he did. But Swami Shivananda was so introverted by nature. Those who saw him in later years wouldn't, it was such a remarkable change later on. He was so open to everybody. But in his early years as a monk, he was very introverted, very grave. Others were afraid of him. They would be afraid to approach him. Years later, when he was in Belur Math, Swami Premananda was the manager of the Belur Math. And a lot of young students, young men would come to Swami Premananda because he was very loving, very, affectionate and inspiring. So they would gather around him, but they would carefully avoid Swami Shivananda because he was so grave and quiet. And so when Swami Premananda passed away, and Swami Shivananda became, took charge of the monastery as the manager, all those people stopped coming because they're scared of him. And so he had to tell them, you can come to me. I'll talk to you too. So in Varanasi, that was on full display, the absolute, the inward, the Shiva-like nature of Shivananda. What an inspiring description is there. The small ashram, the new ashram. His idea of spreading Vedanta was not lectures. was not teaching only by the example of his life. So he did not even have a special room of his own. He would live in the hall of the ashram, and he had a bed. His bed was a tiger skin and a blanket on top of that. Even in winter, he would sleep on the floor. He would spread straw on the floor, put the tiger skin on top of that, sleep on that, and pull the blanket over himself. And he would roll it up in daytime. He would get up at 2 o'clock in the dead of the night and sit for meditation until early morning, when he would go and open the shrine, and then he would chant from the Gita and the Chandi and the Upanishads for a long time. He would go and supervise the work of the ashram, and then take his bath. He would sit for ritualistic worship of Sri Ramakrishna and offer whatever food the devotees had bought. And that food only he and the other monks would eat. In the afternoon, he would sit in meditation again. In the evening, after the evening vespers, the arati was performed, he would sit in meditation again till late, until the night food was called for night food. He lived like that for several years. So the whole place vibrated with this spirituality. But not many people came, because he was always indrawn. And when the money given by the Maharaja had run out, the ashram fell in dire straits. Shivanandaji collected some money, and then somebody else stole that money. So they were in terrible condition until some funds came in finally, and the ashram. So that ashram is still there. This is Ramakrishna, Sri Ramakrishna Advaita Ashrama in Benares. There are two ashramas there. There's a big hospital, and this other one started by Swami Shivananda, which is next to it. Swami Shivanandaji, after the passing of Swami Vivekananda also, Swami Shivananda was in Belur Mutt to help his brother monks, Brahmananda especially, and Swami Saradananda and Swami Premananda, who were running the monastery. He was not keen to play the role of a guru, So once he got a vision of the Holy Mother, who in his dreams told him to start initiating, give mantra diksha. He still was reluctant, so he asked Swami Brahmananda, and Swami Brahmananda said, yes, those who get mantra diksha from you will be blessed. So he started slowly initiating people into the mantra. He used to get the vision of Sri Ramakrishna every day. In Benares, he says to a monk, Chandra Maharaj, he says, Chandra, the day today has passed uselessly. I have wasted this day. I did not see Sri Ramakrishna today. I did not shed tears for God today. So more or less every day he would get visions of Sri Ramakrishna. He would feel the living presence of Sri Ramakrishna. When 1922, for example, Swami Brahmananda was seriously ill, and Swami Shivananda decided the next time Sri Ramakrishna appears to me, I shall ask a boon to make Swami Brahmananda recover. And Sri Ramakrishna appeared to him in his meditation, or I don't know, maybe with eyes open, I don't know. He says in a vision he saw Sri Ramakrishna. Just as he was about to pray for Swami Brahmananda's recovery, he saw Sri Ramakrishna turn his face away and disappear. And then he realized that Swami Brahmananda would not survive. And within a few days, Swami Brahmananda was gone. And they decided to make Swami Shivananda the next president of the order. So he became the second president of the Ramakrishna order in 1922. And a lot of what you see as the Ramakrishna order today in India and abroad, that has happened during the time of Swami Shivananda. It was many of his disciples and also Swami Brahmananda's disciples who went out across India and across the world, especially here in the United States. A number of the centers which came up were at that time. He would encourage the monks to go and start these centers and spread. He himself started so many centers. Mumbai, somebody gave him land, a prime plot of land. It's near Khar West in Mumbai. It's very centrally located. That's ashram started because of Swami Shivananda. Nagpur, the ashram was started by Swami Shivananda. A number of other ashrams in India. One interesting one is a very small ashram, Kadapa. It's in Andhra Pradesh. So this is a small place. But the ashram there is very interesting. There was a Muslim gentleman. It was started by a Muslim gentleman He had been given, he was a prominent person in the city there, and he had been given the title of Khan Bahadur by the British government. He was a Sufi Muslim, and yet he was very devoted to Sri Ramakrishna. And he had established a small ashram. And when he invited Swami Shivananda to go there, and so Shivananji went there, he saw this Muslim gentleman would sit in front of the picture of Sri Ramakrishna all day long, quietly in meditation. Later that became an ashram of the Ramakrishna order, and now it's an ashram in our order. There are interesting stories of famous visitors. I mentioned Lady Minto, but then along came Mahatma Gandhi, accompanied by Motilal Nehru, who was Jawaharlal Nehru's father. And they came on a visit to Belur Math. Swami Shivananda showed them around. Mahatma Gandhi bowed down to the relics of Sri Ramakrishna. A huge crowd had gathered because Mahatma Gandhi is visiting. So Mahatma Gandhi was forced to make a speech. And he said, I have not come here to give a talk. I have just come here. I have not come here to talk about the independence movement and the non-cooperation movement and the spinning wheel which he was propagating at that time. I have come here just to bow down and salute Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda. I have read Vivekananda, Mahatma Gandhi said in that speech. I have read Vivekananda, and my love for my country has only increased. And I appeal to the young men gathered here that don't leave here empty-handed. Take with you a few of the ideals which Swami Vivekananda taught, and make your life blessed. Jawaharlal Nehru also visited and met Swami Shivananda in the home of service in Benares. And not many people know that his wife, Kamala Nehru, was a disciple of Swami Shivananda. She took mantra diksha from Swami Shivananda ji. Swami Shivananda, he guided so many people in their spiritual life. I can only narrate a few such incidents. There is a book for seekers of God. So the conversations with Swami Shivananda, they have been collected, and the choicest ones have been translated into English, and that's a wonderful book for spiritual seekers. Very inspiring. Just reading that book is like meditating. Once one monk asked Swami Shivananda, what have you realized? What is your realization? And Swami Shivananda said, by the grace of Sri Ramakrishna, I have realized the Purnam, the infinite. And then he chanted, Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. That is the infinite. This is the infinite. From that infinite, this infinite has come. When you discover that infinite in this infinite, the infinite alone remains. And this is what I have realized. This is the highest Advaitic realization. Once Swami Kamaleshwaranji came to Swami Shivananda and said, I want to study the Upanishads with you. And Swami Shivananda said, can you study our lives? Our lives are the Upanishads. Sri Ramakrishna has lit this flame in us, and we can pass it on to you. So we are all connected that way. Swami Satprakashanandaji, who established the Vedanta Society in St. Louis, where Swami Chaitanandaji is there, he once asked, he was a disciple of Swami Brahmananda. So he asked Swami Shivananda that these days many people take the mantra from the Holy Mother, and many people take the mantra from Swami Brahmananda. Is there any difference? And Swami Shivananda said, no. Why should there be difference? It is the same grace of the Master, of Sri Ramakrishna, flowing through two different channels. The grace of God is flowing through the Holy Mother and through Swami Brahmananda. It is the same. But what do you mean, take initiation? You do not take it. It is given. It is given. And Swami Satprakashanji said, it's for the rest of my life, a great, a problem was solved for me. The nature of initiation, that it is a grace given from God. So when he would send these young monks to different parts of the world to start the ashram, especially here in the West, he had nothing to give them because obviously they didn't have money to give or any kind of help. Just this one solitary young monk. But he would give them relics of little ashes, the relics of Sri Ramakrishna or Swami Brahmananda or Swami Vivekananda, and later of the Holy Mother also. And those relics, they form like the spiritual core of the ashrama. So in St. Louis, for example, when I went there, Swami Chaitanandaji told him, the same Swami Satprakashananda had been given those relics by Swami Shivananda. And when Satprakashanji passed away, he transferred the ashram to Swami Chaitananda, the responsibility. And his transfer was, he gave him a key to a box. And he said, take care of this, take care of the devotees, take care of the ashram, the worship of Sri Ramakrishna, and this one. So when you opened the box, there were these 6 little boxes inside. The ashes, the relics of Sri Ramakrishna, of the Holy Mother, of Swami Brahmananda, of Swami Vivekananda. And later on, after Mahapurush Maharaj, Swami Shivananda passed away, his relics were also sent there. So then Swami Chaitanandaji took me and he opened the box and he showed it to me. Those are still there. And likewise in other ashrams also. Swami Nikhilanandaji, who was on the east side, he asked a wonderful question to Swami Shivananda. He said, we hear that those who come to Sri Ramakrishna, this is their last birth. But from Vedanta we realize that we learn, it's only we have to be desireless, and then you have to attain Brahma Jnana, you have to be enlightened, then only it's your last birth. So which is true? It's just you come to Sri Ramakrishna and this is your last birth, or you have to become enlightened and be desireless and that, and then this is your last birth. Swami Shivananda said, oh, I'm not all that learned in the scriptures. He was deeply, he had realized all of it. But he just said, no, I'm not all that learned in the scriptures, but let me ask you in a simple way. Suppose at the point of your death, he asks Swami Nikhilananda, at the point of your death, Sri Ramakrishna appears to you and says, is there anything you would want so that you want to come back again? Do you want another body, another life? What would you say? And Swami Nikhilananda said, no, I don't want anything. And Swami Shivananda said, good. That kind of desirelessness is attained by the grace of Sri Ramakrishna, then it is your last birth. If you feel that way, if you feel that I really do not want anything, a question comes that, but if Sri Ramakrishna comes to you at the point of your death, will that happen? Yes, that's the guarantee that Holy Mother has given us, that Swami Brahmananda, Swami Shivananda and others have given us. So anyway, the point is that desirelessness, if you feel yourself that really, I want freedom from this cycle of birth and death. I do not have worldly desires anymore. If anything, I have the desire for God, but nothing else. Then this is your last birth. You will be free. What a great insight that Swami Shivananda gave. Related to this, that when Swami Shivananda says, I don't know much about the scriptures, but this I know. Once Swami Shivananda, he went to Deoghar Ramakrishna Mission. So among the ashrams which were started during Swami Shivananda's time, one was the Deoghar Ramakrishna Mission, Vidyapit. It's a school for boys. So when Swami Shivananda went there are very interesting stories. There was a great yogi who lived on a hill nearby. I'm not taking the name of the yogi because even now there are many disciples of that yogi. Or I can tell you, Balananda Brahmachari. I mean, the story is a very nice story anyway. So Swami Shivananda, Balananda Brahmachari had come to meet Swami Shivananda with some of his disciples. And Swami Shivananda was there. One of Swami Shivananda's disciples was Swami Omkarananda, who was a very learned monk and quite aggressive. So one of the disciples of this yogi, Balananda Brahmachari, was a scholar, a pandit, who started questioning Swami Shivananda about intricate things in Vedanta, in the scriptures. And Swami Shivananda couldn't pay attention to that. He fumbled, to the annoyance of Swami Omkarananda, who got up in great annoyance and went to that pandit and said, look, if you want Siddhanta, the conclusions of the Shastras, the final truth, go to him. If you want to debate and quarrel and argue, come to me. And then Balananda Brahmachari, the yogi whose disciple was that Pandit, quickly shushed that Pandit. He said, "Hush, what are you doing? This is Mahapurusha. He's an enlightened being. What are you doing?" There's a story in Deoghar of when Swami Shivananda was there in the ashram. He was ill one night and he had asthma. He could not breathe. And he felt that my breath was going, I might die, And he said, I just sat in meditation and all the world fell away from me, even my sensation of the body. He said in Bengali, Budo Shadur Dhyan, so it's a meditation of an old monk, which he means he was immediately became absorbed. He said, I became absorbed in that and all troubles fled from me. When I came back to the world and the suffering had ceased. One of the monks asked, what is that? What did you become absorbed in? And he said, in the Atman, in my real nature. So there's the famous temple of Baidyanath Dham, Shiva temple there. And pilgrims from all over India, especially from Bihar, thousands of times, nowadays hundreds of thousands, they come once in a year and they go to the temple to worship Shiva. And Swami Shivananda, there is a rock, even now in the ashram that rock is there. Swami Shivananda used to stand there. It's called Darshaniya Tat. From there you can see the first view of the steeples of the temple in the distance. You can see that. Swami Shivananda stood there and he went into samadhi, seeing the pilgrims coming to the temple of Baidyanath Dham. He would get absorbed in. Once he had gone to Banaras, and the coach in which he was going, it suffered an accident, and then he fell down. He was hurt. That night in the ashram, he developed a high fever, and then he sat in meditation. And the next day in the morning, he said, I was very ill. But next day, he said that I was very ill, but last night, Baba Vishwanath Shiva in Banaras, he came to me, and he separated the two. That's all he said. Separated the two means the self from the body-mind. That was his natural state. Later on in Belur Math, when he was often very ill in his old age, and the monks and the devotees and doctors were worried. So one night they heard that he couldn't sleep all night. Next morning, one of the monks went and bowed down to him and said, Maharaj, how are you today? He said, I'm fine. And then they said that, but we heard that last night you suffered so much you couldn't sleep. Oh, you mean this body? It's not at all good, not good at all. But I am fine. This was his natural state. He was very childlike. On his bed, there would be so many things on his bed. There would be like a toy, children's toys, a stick which he would, playfully threaten the monks with, like this. He would show that, and then there would be a book of children's stories, like fairy tales, and so many things. So somebody asked him, why do you keep so many things on your bed? He said, my mind naturally goes to the absolute. I have to keep it down with so many little things here and there. Once Josephine MacLeod was visiting Belur Math, and she had a necklace in which she kept the relics of Swami Vivekananda there in that necklace. One night she was sleeping in her room in the guest house, and a thief, a young man, broke in, and he was about to snatch the necklace from her neck, and she screamed, and this thief ran away, and there were monks outside who caught him, especially Swami Purnananda. Purnananda was there, Punyanandaji. So he caught him. So these monks caught him. They tied him up, and the younger monks, they thrashed him, they beat him up. So next morning, when Swami Shivanandaji went on his tour of the ashrama, he was told about the last night's incident, and he saw the thief who had been tied up. And he said, my boy, is this the place to come and steal? If these monks start beating you up, you will die. But he left that thief tied up. And he went around and he went back to his room. And Josephine MacLeod came to see him, and she said, I was thinking, Swami, that boy must be a devotee. There's so many things around in the room, and he didn't want anything else. He just wanted this necklace. So I'm sure he's a devotee. And Swami Shivananda was so guileless, like a child. He said, you are right. And he immediately sent word to the monks, free him, and give him a nice bath, and feed him nicely, and give him a new cloth, and bring him to me. So after some time, the would-be thief was seen dressed like a dandy, parading around in the monastery. And he went and bowed down to Swami Shivananda. And Swami Shivananda said, my boy, do you want to become a monk? So we don't know what his reply was, but I'm sure the thief must have been really transformed by all these experiences. He was childlike. One day, there's the stairs in the old monastery building, which are still there, the same wooden stairs. He would walk down every day, and on the way down, there's a picture of Sri Ramakrishna. He would say, Joy Thakur, and victory to Sri Ramakrishna. And then there was a picture in the stairs. Those pictures are still there, the same pictures. A picture of Swami Vivekananda. So they had already passed away long ago. He would pass the picture of Swami Vivekananda, and he would say, Jai Swamiji, victory to Swamiji. And then there was a picture of Swami Brahmananda, and he would bow down to that on his way down the stairs, step by step. Jai Maharaj, victory to Maharaj. So that is Swami Brahmananda. At the bottom of the stairs, there's a picture. There was his picture, Swami Shivananda's picture, which is still there. And then he would go to that picture and he would say, and who is this scoundrel? And then he would peer at it and he would say, oh, it's you, Shivananda. You have been staying with these sadhus and you have become a sadhu too. With staying with the sadhus, you have become a sadhu too. He was full of compassion for everybody. Every day he would ask, is there somebody who wants initiation, mantra diksha? One day he asked his attending monk, look if there is anybody waiting for initiation. And this monk went downstairs, and truly enough, there was this young lady who was waiting there, and she said quite shyly that she wanted to meet Swami Shivananda and take his blessings, but she was embarrassed and she was sorry because she had led an immoral life and she had committed many sins, and but would it be possible for her to see Swami Shivananda? And this monk was uneasy. He went back upstairs and did not say anything. But Swami Shivananda would not let him go, and he asked, is there anybody? And this monk hesitantly said, well, there is a lady sitting downstairs. And that's all he said. Swami Shivananda said, oh, but what of that? People make mistakes. The Lord has come to uplift the sinners. It is perfectly all right. Tell her to take a bath in the Ganga and come and meet me. I shall give her initiation. He didn't even let him complete the sentence. He knew what was going on. And so this lady went, and Swami Shivananda blessed her. He would say many times when devotees would come and say that I have committed sins, I am suffering from guilt, he would say, what of that? Take the name of the Lord. And he would say it like a mountain. Saints are like this mountain of cotton. If you put a matchstick, light a matchstick and put it, the whole thing burns up in a trice. Similarly, take the name of Sri Ramakrishna. Nothing more is necessary. With devotion to Sri Ramakrishna, repeat the mantra, the name of Sri Ramakrishna, all your sins will be burnt up. He would say like that. When you make up your mind not to sin anymore and think to take the name of the Lord, and you'll be cleansed, you'll be purified, you'll be set free from sin. There was this fisherman. He would keep a keen eye around the ashram. In Belur Math, on the bank of the Ganga, there was this old fisherman. Even now you can see these fishermen who have these little boats, and they go out fishing all day long. This old fisherman, Purna Haldar, he had become bent with age, and he struggled to make a living by catching a few fish. And Swami Shivananda was so compassionate. From his upstairs room, he could see that. And he would give money to a monk, go and buy whatever he has caught, just to make things easy for him. One day he did not see that fisherman. He sent word, where is he? And they found out that he had taken ill and died. Immediately Swami Shivananda sent money to his widow for performing his final funeral rites. And later on, he would regularly, as long as he lived, he would regularly send a little bit of money every month to the widow to support her. This is just one example. There are many such examples of anybody who was in suffering. It's not just spirituality. Anybody who was in financial suffering, anybody who was depressed, unhappy, who was sick, he would try his best to help. His heart melted in love and sympathy for all those around him. Towards the end of his life, for several months, he was quite sick. Towards the end of his life, he also got a stroke, and he was partially paralyzed, and he could only indicate what he wanted with movements of his hands, or he couldn't speak very clearly. But his face was always full of joy, and he always felt the divine presence within him. He would always say to the devotees that he had great faith in Sri Ramakrishna, the picture of Sri Ramakrishna. He said that is not an ordinary photograph. Sri Ramakrishna dwells there. These are his words. Sri Ramakrishna dwells there and answers the prayers of his devotees. Repeat the name of Sri Ramakrishna. In that, the Rama mantra and the Krishna mantra both are there. By repeating the name of Ramakrishna, you get the benefits of repeating the Rama mantra and the Krishna mantra together. In this age, this is the mantra which takes you across the ocean of samsara. So, he would encourage his devotees in this way. One of his devotees was, his disciples was the Queen of Bolangir. Bolangir is a place in Orissa. So the Queen of Bolangir had taken initiation from him. One day she came and she bowed down in tears and she said, "You have many devotees like me, but I have only one, you." And Swami Shivananda pointed out that this is the prayer of Radha to Krishna. So she was saying that you have many devotees, so many disciples, but I have only one. You are the only one that is there for me. And when he visited Bhuvaneshwar Ashrama, this queen, she constructed a special building to house the devotees so that he could stay in some comfort. So that building is still there, which was constructed during the visit of Swami Shivananda to Bhuvaneshwar. Many years ago, when I read this, I was quite incensed because I was a little boy at that time, and I asked my grandfather, who was a young man at that time and in the same area, I said, "Why didn't you take initiation from Swami Shivananda?" And then I could boast that my grandfather was initiated by Swami Shivananda. So he burst out laughing and he said, "Oh, it has its own time. You can't rush these things." I mean, he took initiation, but much later from Swami Shankarananda, many decades later. He and my grandmother both. But I was a little kid and I wanted to tell people that my grandfather was initiated by Swami Shivananda. I was like, "He came here and you were there right there. Why didn't you go to the ashram and take initiation? What were you doing?" In 1934, so Swami Shivananda, he lived till 1934 in that semi-paralyzed state. After the birthday of Sri Ramakrishna, he got to see the birthday of Sri Ramakrishna. Before he had lost the power to speak clearly, he had this vision. He said, last night, dream or vision, I saw Vivekananda and Brahmananda, who had passed on earlier. Vivekananda and Brahmananda, they came to me and they said, "Tarakda, let's go. It's time, let's go." So a few days after the birthday of Sri Ramakrishna, which he got to see that year in 1934, he attained his Mahasamadhi and he passed on. There is a tremendous fund of spiritual blessings, teachings and inspiration he has left behind. In the conversations with Swami Shivananda, especially for seekers of God, you find a wonderful compilation. There's certain books which are prescribed to us monks. When we become monks, we are told, quite apart from the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, the Great Master, complete works of Vivekananda, but there are certain other books like the Conversations with the Holy Mother, the Gospel of the Holy Mother. Then Swami Brahmananda, the Eternal Companion, and his teachings. Then the letters of Swami Turiyananda. And this Seekers of God, Conversations of Swami Shivananda, which are prescribed to the young monks, which help you to build up your spiritual life. His blessings are on all of us. On this day, we bow down to Sri Ramakrishna, the Holy Mother, Swami Vivekananda, Swami Shivananda, and all other direct disciples. May their blessings be upon us. As he said, The same grace flows through Swami Brahmananda and the Holy Mother. He told Swami Sarvaprakasananda, the same grace flowing through him and through all the direct disciples to us. May our lives be blessed. May the Lord protect all of us. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ram Krishna Arpanamastu.